following video will contain content meant for mature audiences, so if I hear you laugh at the word booty once, I'm afraid you'll have to leave. Hey everybody, how's things? Me? I've been kicking ass and taking names in a game called Ion Fury, a cyberpunk first-person shooter that can be as many ways fun as it can be cheesy. And oh boy is it cheesy. But how cheesy can it get? Well, let's start with the story and find out. In Ion Fury you play as Shelly, Bombshell Harrison, a bomb disposal expert under the Global Defense Force organization. Your goal is to stop Dr. Jadis Haskell, a guy so obsessed with transhumanism to the point where he achieved cult leader status, as well as unleashing an army of cybernetically enhanced soldiers in the city of Neo-DC. Though, with all of the explosions going on around town, I'd be surprised if Shelly or Haskell could even keep track of each other. In fact, let's talk about those explosions. Ion Fury runs on the Build engine, which is the same engine that Duke Nukem 3D, Shadow Warrior, and Blood ran on. Obviously, the engine has been modified to be able to handle this kind of game and what it's doing, but even then, I really love the retro aesthetic. It felt like I was playing an old FPS game lost to time. The game uses sprites in a 2.5D world where the environment is 3D along with many of the assets, but the enemies themselves and various items and weapons, and even Shelly herself, are 2D. I mean, most of the time you're fighting and not really exploring until the dust settles, but even then, just looking around you, you can tell the place is very lived in, or it was, at least. Speaking of looking around, I need to give praise to the level design. Each level in Ion Fury was distinct from one another and huge, with plenty of secrets and shortcuts to navigate the level faster and explore. It was a real treat. To find some of the secrets, you'd have to get creative and interact with your environment, which often led to some clever little chunks of the level you could miss if you weren't keeping your eyes peeled. This game loves to reward curiosity. For example, there was a section where I was really wondering, okay, what is the secret here and whatnot? And I'm not gonna lie, I looked it up because when it comes to secrets and whatnot, I tend to look around as often as I can and it's not obvious. So what could it be? What I had to do was that pool, there was a pool of water in one level and I ran up to it, and typically you're technically swimming on it even though you're holding your gun up. You know how first person games are. What I had to do was crouch, and when you crouch, you dive underwater, and that's where I found the secret. And then there's another point in the game where after that I just started running into walls until I could find one I could clip through or find a secret, or if there's a shelf that's just a little bit pushed off of the wall or it looks like it's been pushed off of the wall, I'm like, I could probably get behind there. You go behind there, there's the secret. That kind of secret, those kinds of things. Again, the game loves to reward curiosity. Another cool thing is that you have the option to play in third person, though I personally opted to play in first person most of the time. It's not that the third person was bad, it's just it's easier to aim in first person because the game is built for first person. Third person is cool. They do what they can to make that playable and whatnot, but clearly the first person got more time and whatnot. Moving along, let's talk about the bangs and booms. I mean, sound. I mean sound.
You are still just a rat in a cage. I will enjoy your demise.
Get that fucking jalopy out of here.
There are very clear audio cues for everything here. You'll know what weapons are being fired, what enemies you'll encounter, and more before even turning the corner. It can get a little messy in a large firefight, but overall the sound is great. I also want to say that the dialogue in the game is delightfully cheesy. It screams late 80s or late 90s video game dialogue, and they do a great job replicating that despite the fact that there are plenty of references to our current pop culture as well. Oh, by the way, I hope you like one-liners, because Shelly's got a shotgun full of them. Musically, the game has a lot of catchy tunes, once again replicating the old school arcadey music. But That's enough about sound and music. What's the game like? The game will kick your ass. I don't do a very good Hank Hill impression, but there you go. The game will kick your ass. Over and over again. You need to be on your toes and learn to be nimble. The game has multiple difficulty settings to help with this, but I played on the normal difficulty and it was still very challenging. At least for me, for someone who doesn't play that kind of old school style shooter, where you always have to be on the move. If you've played Doom, then you get what I'm talking about. If you played Duke Nukem, then you know what I'm talking about. In fact, like I said earlier, the engine was designed for Duke Nukem 3D way back in the day. So of course it would play like old school Duke Nukem. So don't rely on modern FPS mechanics and the like to help you here. There are some. I mean, obviously the principles came from somewhere, but don't treat this game like your average shooter. Keep on the move, keep moving. Moving and shooting is the name of the game. You'll have plenty of ammo, trust me. If you want me to be specific, I just mean don't run and take cover and then peek out and shoot. You could do it that way, but the AI is pretty good at finding you at where you're at, and then you'll just get bombed to death. No, keep circling them and shoot, lob your grenades and all that. Strafing is the name of the game, and utilizing every tool at your disposal, and I mean every tool, is how you beat the game. You'll have your favorites, but just know that not every situation calls for your favorite weapon. If you already like what you're hearing so far and you decide to get the game, that's the best advice I can give you. Anyway, new enemy types will appear as you progress through the game, and so will the varieties of the encounters. Sometimes you'll be fighting in a small, compact room, and other times you'll be in a large arena. Boss fights are relatively straightforward as well, and honestly not as difficult as fighting all the other enemies. In fact, the other enemies that appear as you're fighting make the fight hard, or harder, I should say, because the boss fights are still challenging to some extent, just not as challenging as fighting a bunch of enemies that require their own little ways of dealing with them. Now, before I move on to the final verdict, let's talk about bugs real quick. There aren't any game-breaking bugs necessarily, but I will say that you should be careful around lockers and other small static objects that are close together. Static meaning you can't knock them over if you bump into them. They just stay where they are. There have been times in the game where I ran and or jumped at them either on accident or on purpose to use them as a stepping stone or something like that, and died immediately because Shelly would get stuck between two objects and it would damage her or just kill her instantly. Again, it's not necessarily game breaking, since if you save appropriately or often enough, you won't have to start at the last checkpoint or the last autosave. Not to mention the fact that it didn't happen all that often for me. But with that, let's check the final verdict. All in all, I had a really good time with this game. I was able to complete it in just about 8 hours. That said, I wasn't always hunting around for secret rooms and whatnot. With that said, the game is definitely a go for it for me. But I should mention that the game's price is $25 on Steam. And according to How Long to Beat, the game's main campaign on average will last you about 9.5 hours, with extra content included, adding about 4 more hours and completionists totaling up to 21 hours. If this is your kind of game, then by all means, go for it. But if $25 sounds like a bit much for you, or you don't think you'll play this game a lot, then I'd recommend getting it on sale. $15 is a price I can recommend. But again, if everything you've seen or heard caught your interest, then by all means, go for it. Embrace the cheese. And with that, I hope you guys have enjoyed your stay. I'm TUSDarryl, and I'll see you guys next time. Later.